Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into a world where the flick of a tiny tail and the skitter of paws means something far more sacred than you might guess. Imagine this, you're walking barefoot on smooth, cool marble. The air smells of incense and ghee, mingled with something earthier. You step carefully, not because the floor is slippery, but because hundreds of mice are scampering across your path. You glance down, and there's one perched on your sandal, peering up at you with solemn black eyes. And here's the kicker, no one's batting an eye. In fact, if you feed that little guy, you might just earn a blessing. Welcome to the Karni Mata Temple in Deshnoke, Rajasthan. This is not your average tourist stop. You're not here for ornate sculptures or golden relics. You're here to commune with rats, over 25,000 of them. Revered, protected, and fed daily by pilgrims and priests alike. You probably wouldn't survive 5 minutes if you've got a rodent phobia, but for the faithful, it's a place of profound peace. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment with your location and the time where you're watching. It's always cool seeing where everyone's drifting off from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You arrived just before sunrise. The temple gates are already open, sunlight slanting over the threshold. Pilgrims bow low, ringing bells, scattering milk-soaked grains on the marble floor. You do your best not to step on anyone, human or rodent. You notice something odd. The mice, or rather rats, locals call them cabas, aren't afraid of you. Not even a little. They mill about like monks in a monastery, quietly tending to invisible tasks. Historians still argue whether the temple's rodent population was intentional from the start or simply grew organically with the legend. What's known is this. Karni Mata was a 14th century mystic, revered as an incarnation of Durga, the warrior goddess. She lived an ascetic life, wandering the desert, performing miracles, and, according to oral tradition, refusing to die. Yep. She just walked into a cave one day and vanished. And this temple? It was built to honor her, and the rodents? They're said to be her followers reborn. There's a sweet little local tale, half remembered, half invented, about a newlywed bride who dropped a pearl earring near the temple steps. As she wept, unsure how to retrieve it, a cabba darted out from a crack, nudged the earring toward her toes, and then scurried back inside. The bride named him Cheeky, and returned every year to feed him laddus. The temple caretakers are meticulous. Every day, massive pots of food are prepared not for the visitors, but for the rats, cooked grains, sweetened milk, coconut. Specially designed grills keep out predators like birds or larger animals. And here's the wild part. If a cabba dies on your watch, you're expected to replace it. Not symbolically. You actually must buy a silver or gold rat statue and offer it to the temple. That's a pretty heavy price for one lost whisker. It's not all reverence and fairy tales, though. Occasionally, scientists and journalists peek in with skeptical eyes. How do they control disease? What about sanitation? But the faithful shrug it off. These rats don't spread illness, they say. They cure it. Devotees have reported ailments disappearing after a temple visit, especially skin conditions. The cabba are seen not just as clean, but as divine. And somewhere in the temple, legend says, live a few rare albino rats, considered especially holy. If you glimpse one, it's good luck. If one runs across your foot, congratulations. The gods are literally walking with you. A bit ticklish, maybe, but divine all the same. You settle onto a sun-warmed stone bench and watch the temple come to life. Children pour bowls of water for the rats. An old woman hums a bidjan as a Kaaba climbs onto her lap. In this space, time stretches out. Everything slows. Even the rats seem to pause now and then, whiskers twitching, like they're listening to some frequency you can't quite hear. Outside, the desert waits. Camels grunt. Dust rises. But in here, there's something oddly still, except for the scurrying, of course. You lean back, eyes half closed, and for a moment, even the strangest thing, thousands of sacred rats swirling around your feet, feels kind of comforting. You're still on that sun-warmed bench, and now the air is thick with scent, jasmine garlands, key lamps, and something else. Earthy, warm, unmistakably alive. The temple quiets as the morning rituals end. And here's where the legend deepens, into the myth of Karni Mata's divine bargain with death itself. Picture this: Karni Mata, already known for miraculous feats, loses her stepson, Laxman, when he drowns in a lake while fetching water. But this isn't just grief. This is cosmic-level outrage. Karni Mata marches straight to Yama, the god of death, and demands that he return the boy's soul. Yama, being Yama, says, "Sorry, not how the system works." But Karni Mata, in true goddess fashion, isn't here to accept celestial red tape. Here's where things go off script. She negotiates, not just for Laxman, but for all her descendants and followers. Yama relents, kind of. He agrees that from now on, when her people die, they won't go to the underworld. Instead, they'll be reborn as mice to live in her temple until their next human life. A soul layover, if you will, with snacks. Now, historians still argue whether this myth evolved independently or absorbed older animist beliefs where animals were thought to house spirits. Either way, it sticks. For centuries, devotees believed, and still do, that when they pass, they won't be gone. They'll just shrink a bit, grow some whiskers, and continue life under Karni Mata's warm, watchful gaze. Imagine believing that your great-grandfather might be curled up in that shadowy corner, nibbling chickpea flour off a brass plate. Or that the Kaaba brushing past your ankle isn't just a rat, but a soul waiting its turn. There's something strangely comforting in that. A soft reincarnation, no fiery trials or judgment scales. Just a cozy temple, some sweet milk, and the occasional leftover laddu. There's a popular tale about a merchant who, while feeding the rats, swore he saw one wearing his late wife's favorite anklet. She had been a devotee too. He knelt, tears in his eyes, and whispered her name. The rat paused, looked up at him, and darted off into the dark. He swore, until his last breath, it had been her. Not everyone's convinced, of course. Colonial records from British officers who visited the temple in the 19th century are full of baffled, slightly horrified descriptions. One famously wrote, "The natives pay homage to the vermin, feeding them sweets with greater care than their own children." A bit judgy, but also very British Empire. What those officials missed, though, was the bigger picture, how this story wove together loss, devotion, and an unbreakable thread between life and death. Even now, that legend influences daily practice. Mice aren't harmed, shooed, or even ignored. If a Kaaba gets underfoot, people pause, step aside. If one climbs onto your bag, you wait. It's rude to interrupt someone's sacred mouse moment. There's also the tale of a young boy who tripped while running through the temple and landed flat on a rat. The creature died instantly. His family, mortified, spent 3 months' wages buying a silver rat idol to replace it. The boy later became a pujari, a temple priest. They say the Kaaba he stepped on forgave him. How they know that is never explained. But that's folklore for you, impossible, implausible, and somehow perfectly believable at bedtime. The rats, for their part, seem utterly indifferent to their holy status. They nap in brass bowls, chew through sacred cloths, and once famously ate a visiting dignitary's lunch right off his plate. Devotees laughed and said, "They only take what's truly blessed." A solid excuse if you're ever short on samosas. You wander now, deeper into the temple, where marble gives way to shaded nooks, and torchlight flickers against old stone. The Kaaba are everywhere. One drinks from a tiny carved basin. Another curls up beside a sleeping pilgrim. None of them screech. None of them run. There's a strange serenity here, sacred, surreal, and just the tiniest bit absurd. You reach a small alcove lit by a single flame. Here, legend says, Karni Mata's spirit lingers most. Offerings pile at her statue's feet, gold bangles, silk scarves, tiny silver mice. A Kaaba sits atop her head, perfectly still. A priest once joked that it was the reincarnation of an accountant keeping track of prayers like spreadsheets. And so, the legend lives on, not just in marble or myth, but in the daily shuffle of thousands of tiny feet. Reincarnated souls with twitching noses, each on their own sacred journey, nibbling their way back to the human world. By now, your senses are adjusting to this peculiar world. The constant rustle of paws against polished marble has become a soft background rhythm, like rain against a tent. The scent of ghee and dry grain is familiar, and you're starting to see the Kaaba differently, not just as animals, but as something more. Something tethered, delicately, to an ancient belief that death isn't a period but a pause. And that brings us to the idea that these mice might actually be your ancestors. Now, to be fair, not every Indian tradition believes in this specific brand of reincarnation. Hindu cosmology is vast and varied, like a sprawling, infinite buffet where each region picks a slightly different plate. But in Dishnoka, and among Karni Mata's followers, the belief is solid. Those Kaaba aren't strangers. They're family. You pause by a low-slung brass railing, watching as a woman in a saffron sari scatters seeds from a pouch. She speaks softly, not to herself, but to the rats. Names spill from her lips. Some are old and grandparent-like, others are new and sweet. She believes her grandmother is among them, watching, listening, maybe nibbling politely in the shadows. There's a kind of peace in that, in knowing your people aren't gone, just squeakier. This isn't just nostalgia either. In many rural Rajasthani homes, stories passed down through generations include mentions of relatives reappearing as Kaaba. A popular one goes like this. A man dies young, and a few days later, a mouse appears in the family kitchen. It refuses to leave. It drinks from the same teacup every morning. Eventually, the family starts saving a drop of chai just for him. "That's Makund," they say. He always liked extra ginger. Historians still argue whether these stories emerged from oral folklore or were reinforced by temple practices. Did the temple create the belief? Or did the belief bring life to the temple? As usual, the answer is probably both. Anthropologists studying Karni Mata's followers often note how this mouse ancestor belief reshapes grief. Death, in this narrative, loses its sting. Mourning is softened. The soul isn't lost, just temporarily wearing a fur coat. You still miss your loved one, sure, but you also keep an eye out for twitching noses and miniature footprints near your door. There's also a deeper symbolism here. Mice are small, quiet, often overlooked. In making them sacred, the tradition elevates humility. It says, even the smallest creature can carry a mighty soul. Even a rat can be holy. You walk now into one of the temple's quieter courtyards, shaded by neem trees. A Kaaba scurries past you, dragging a full cracker in its mouth like it's won the lottery. Another dozes in the sun, its tiny paws twitching in dreamland. And here's a strange, beautiful thought. Maybe he's dreaming of his last life. Maybe he remembers what it felt like to walk on two legs, to speak, to pray. Or maybe he's just dreaming about more crackers. Both options are equally sacred here. You sit on a low stone step, watching the Kaaba move like a living tide. Their movements are so synchronized, so gentle, it almost feels choreographed, like a furry ballet. And there, in that hush, you feel it, the essence of belief. Not in grand temples or thunderous sermons, but in the quiet conviction that your grandmother might be curled up beneath a bench, snoozing contentedly with her tail wrapped around a peanut. There's another tale passed between devotees, about a Kaaba who refused to eat from anyone's hand, until one specific man came along. The moment he entered the temple, she scampered up his arm and nuzzled his cheek. The man fainted from joy. "It's my daughter," he sobbed. "She always climbed on me like that." Was it? Who knows? But the man believed. And in that moment, that belief was enough to make it true. You glance around and notice more visitors have arrived. Children giggle as Kaaba tug at their shoelaces. A teenage girl kneels in a corner, drawing a spiral of rice flour around a sleeping rat like it's a sacred yantro. For them, this isn't weird. It's not even mystical. It's just home. And isn't that the heart of every bedtime story? The idea that somewhere out there, even after everything, you can come back. Not as a stranger, but as yourself. Still remembered. Still loved. Still nibbling on life's leftovers, in a place where even the tiniest whiskered soul has a name. The temple walls hum with sunlight now, casting long shadows where Kaaba nap in cozy clusters. And just outside those cool stone halls, monsoon clouds are starting to gather. The first fat droplets splatter the earth, kicking up that unmistakable scent, petrichor. You know the one. Dust meeting water. Old meets new. A scent that feels older than memory. And with the rains come the stories. In many rural parts of India, especially in Rajasthan, the monsoon isn't just weather, it's narrative season. As families gather indoors, stories pour out just like the rain, and a surprising number of them star mice. Not just any mice, but heroic ones. Clever ones. Occasionally clumsy ones who bundle their way into saving the day. You might hear a grandmother leaning close to a wide-eyed child, whispering the tale of Babley the Brave, a temple mouse who once gnawed through the robes of a demon-disguised yogi revealing his wickedness and saving the village from a very suspicious mango offering. Or Chintu Chattertail, the little Kaba who overheard a plot to steal sacred milk and foiled the crime by squeaking just the right way at just the right time. These aren't bedtime fluff. These are moral blueprints, slipped into small bodies. Mice represent more than just resourcefulness. They're symbols of transformation, of making the most of the tiny roles we play. Because, let's be honest, in the great epic of life, most of us aren't wielding swords or flying chariots. We're carrying crumbs and dodging sandals. And that's enough. Historians still argue whether these stories emerged as child-friendly versions of grander Hindu myths, or if they predate them entirely, rooted in agrarian folklore where mice were everyday companions and occasional pests. Either way, they've endured, retold with new names, new jokes, but the same twitchy heart. You slip out from under the temple canopy into a covered walkway where the sound of rain grows louder, more insistent. A cluster of children huddle around a shrine, watching a Kaba dart between puddles. One of them points and giggles. "Look, that one's running like he stole a mango." The others erupt into laughter. It's a line from a story they all know. Modi the mango thief. A mouse so greedy he rolled down a hill inside the fruit he tried to smuggle from the gods. But these tales aren't just for giggles. They're teaching tools. Each one contains a lesson about loyalty, honesty, wit, or, occasionally, the dangers of sneaking into someone else's rice stash. They're parables dressed in fur. One particularly beloved monsoon story involves two mice, Viru and Diru, who build a miniature raft from toothpicks and flower petals to escape a flooded granary. Their journey includes outsmarting a snake, making friends with a philosophical frog, and discovering a stash of cardamom bigger than their heads. It's part survival tale, part spiritual allegory, and entirely adorable. You lean against a stone pillar, listening to the drip 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 of rain and the murmured laughter of pilgrims. Somewhere, a Kaba sneezes. It's oddly delicate. In many of these tales, the mouse wins not by strength but by cleverness. And maybe that's the point. The world may belong to lions and gods, but sometimes the mouse is the one who finds the secret door, who remembers the hidden passage, who knows where the real treasure's buried. And here's an odd fact. In several regions, it's considered lucky to see a mouse during the first rainfall of the monsoon, especially if it's running toward shelter, not away from it. Locals believe it means the rains will be steady, the crops healthy, the gods pleased. So if you're ever caught in a downpour in India and spot a tiny blur dashing under your shoe, smile. That's not just a mouse. That's prophecy on pause. Even modern storytellers keep the tradition alive. Animated shorts, puppet shows, temple plays where children don paper ears and painted whiskers. In these versions, the mice are still heroes, tiny Davids in a world full of sleepy Goliaths. You return to the temple's heart as the rain slows, the floor glistening, the air cooler. The Kaba emerge cautiously, their whiskers twitching like radar. You watch them reassemble, little tribes of fur and faith. And in their choreography, you start to see something deeper. Not just instinct, not just hunger, but story. The old stories, soaked into stone and fur, whispered in the rain, remembered by hearts that beat much faster than ours. And just like that, another tale begins. The rain has passed, and now everything smells a little cleaner, a little older. The stone underfoot holds the memory of water like a secret, and the Kaaba, those sacred little souls, are back in motion. This next part of your journey brings you face to face with one of the most unexpected figures in the Indian pantheon, Ganesha, the elephant-headed god, and his equally unexpected sidekick, a giant magical mouse named Mushika. Now, you might think of divine vehicles in grand terms: thunder chariots, flying peacocks, flaming lions. But a mouse? That's not just quirky. That's cosmic comedy with a side of symbolism. In your mind's eye, imagine Ganesha, a chubby, serene god with the head of an elephant, 4 arms, and a penchant for sweets, perched atop a sleek black mouse the size of a Labrador retriever. The visual is already delightful. But this isn't some random pet. Mushika is more than a ride. He's a partner, a protector, a metaphor on pause. Mushika wasn't always a mouse. That's right. According to legend, he was once a celestial musician, some say a Gandharv, others a rishi's son, who got cursed into rodent form after stepping on the wrong divine toes. You know how these things go. One minute you're playing a flute in the clouds, the next you're scurrying across temple floors looking for crumbs. Historians still argue whether Mushika's story evolved as a parable about humility or was adapted from older tribal deities who worshipped mouse-like spirits. Whatever the root, the pairing stuck. Ganesha and Mushika appear together in nearly every statue, every painting, every street corner shrine. And if you look closely, Mushika is usually carrying something, like a sweet, or a scroll, or even a tiny flag, because he's not just there for show. He's on divine delivery duty. There's an old Sanskrit proverb that translates roughly to, "Even the mouse may bear the god." It's a line that turns up in dusty manuscripts and bedtime stories alike, a gentle reminder that greatness often arrives in small, squeaky packages. You watch now as a group of devotees chant near a Ganesha idol nestled in the temple's outer sanctum. At its base, nestled beside the god's foot, is a little sculpted Mushika, ears perked, tail curled. Children come up and whisper secrets into his stone ears. That's tradition. If you tell Mushika your wish, he'll carry it to Ganesha on your behalf, express delivery, rodent class. There's even a modern twist to this. In some temples during Ganesh Chaturthi, the great annual festival of Ganesha, worshippers bring miniature mouse statues along with their offerings. Some are carved from sandalwood, others sculpted in clay or folded from silver paper. They're left at the feet of idols or floated down rivers, symbolic whispers carried across realms. And while it might seem quaint, don't be fooled. Mushika's role is serious business. He's seen as the embodiment of the human ego, small, sneaky, restless. And Ganesha? He's the one who masters it, rides it, elevates it into something useful. So riding a mouse isn't just funny, it's enlightenment with a tail. A scholar once wrote that Mushika represents desire, the many little cravings that dart through your mind. And Ganesha, sitting calmly atop him, shows what happens when you tame those urges. You don't crush them. You guide them. You give them purpose. Kind of like house training your inner chaos. And here's your quirky fact for the night. In some parts of Maharashtra, farmers still refer to mice in the field as Bapa's messengers. They'll tolerate a certain amount of grain theft with a shrug and a smile. Let them eat, they say. It's just Mushika's cousins collecting their tax. You leave the idol now, and wander into a quieter alcove where incense curls lazily through the air. A lone Kaba sits atop a bell, preening his fur like he owns the place. And maybe he does. After all, if Ganesha's ride could once have been a celestial musician, who's to say this guy wasn't once a prince? And you? You're just along for the ride. Watching, wondering, dreaming, following the quiet scurry of paws through temples, myths, and metaphors. You stretch your legs a bit, the marble still cool beneath your feet, and glance at a carved pillar where ivy creeps through the stone. A Kaba pauses mid-step nearby, as if listening. And tonight, that's what you're doing too, listening for the tale within the tale. Because Mashika, Ganesha's divine mount, wasn't always the quiet psychic. His origin story is a wild ride all on its own. As we teased before, Mushika began not as a humble mouse, but as a celestial being named Crauncha. Some say he was a powerful demigod, others a highborn Asura. Either way, he had status, strength, and very little patience. The legend goes that Crauncha, in his arrogance, interrupted a sacred gathering of rishis. It might have been an accidental stomp. It might have been a sarcastic comment about someone's beard. Either way, it ended with a curse from a powerful sage, something along the lines of, "May your greatness be reduced to nibbling grain in the shadows." Poof. Mouse form. He wasn't thrilled. Understandably. A demigod turned rodent is the mythological equivalent of being demoted from CEO to mailroom in turn. In his rage, Crauncha began tearing through the world like a divine wrecking ball in mouse form, toppling temples, chewing through sacred scrolls, even stealing offerings from altars. Historians still argue whether this tale is meant to represent the dangers of unchecked pride or simply an allegory for transformation. But either way, the destruction caught Ganesha's attention. Picture it, a divine elephant-headed boy, calm and unshakable, meets a rampaging mouse the size of a warhorse. They battle, not with fire or fists, but through sheer will. And Ganesha, with his famously unflappable demeanor, wins. He doesn't kill Crauncha. He climbs onto his back, tames him, and with that, Crauncha becomes Mashika, his ego transformed into a vessel for purpose. It's like a cosmic trust fall. If your inner chaos can carry you instead of crush you, you're doing all right. There's a lesser-known version of the story that says Mashika asked Ganesha, "Why me?" And Ganesha replied, "Because no one else runs as fast as thought." It's a poetic line, suggesting that Mashika isn't just fast, he's mind-fast. He doesn't need roads. He travels through will, through metaphor, through the back doors of the subconscious. You wander now past a line of tiny Ganesha statues arranged like a parade. Each one has a different pose, a different Mashika. One with a flute in his paw, another wearing a small crown. Someone's placed flowers in front of them, yellow marigolds and red hibiscus, still fresh. And as you look closer, the symbolism starts to settle in. Mashika is the perfect partner for Ganesha, the god of obstacles, because he himself was an obstacle once. Now, he carries the remover of obstacles. It's a loop of redemption, like a failed GPS that eventually finds the right route. There's a saying in old devotional circles, "Even the smallest soul can carry the weight of the divine." And that's Mashika, a former chaos agent turned chauffeur of the gods. Imagine trying to get that job with a resume that says, "Previous experience, chewing temple doors. One pilgrim once said she liked Mashika more than Ganesha. Ganesha's perfect, she laughed. But Mashika? He's like us. Messy, distracted, still learning. She brings a sugar cube every week, places it near the Mashika statue, and whispers, "Good job." You pause under an arched doorway now, where a Kaba is curled up next to a brass oil lamp, snoring in tiny wheezes. And you think about Croucha, about mistakes, about curses that might not be punishments but pivots. Who's to say your worst moment isn't the first step toward a better role? In a way, Mushika's story is everyone's story, starting off too loud, too proud, crashing into things you don't understand, until someone shows up, not to destroy you, but to ride alongside you, to give your chaos a compass. And so, the mouse becomes the mount. The problem becomes the path. And every whisper you share with Mashika gets carried across dimensions, tucked behind twitching ears, and delivered with devotion. Afternoon stretches across the temple like a silk cloth, warm and drowsy. Shadows lengthen, Kaba lounge in sleepy piles, and somewhere in the distance, a drumbeat starts, faint but steady. You follow the sound, turning corners until you arrive at the edge of a festival in full swing. It's not the kind of chaos you might expect. It's gentle, rhythmic. Kids in bright saris and tiny kurta pajamas dart between stalls, giggling, their faces painted with delicate whiskers and noses. Women carried brass trays filled with sweets. And scattered everywhere, on murals, banners, costumes, are mice. Dancing, flying, balancing on ladus. You've arrived at one of India's many regional festivals where mice aren't just background characters. They're the stars. The biggest, of course, is Ganesh Chaturthi, celebrated with colorful processions, enormous statues, and weeks of music. But here in Rajasthan, Karni Mata's own annual celebration steals the show. Devotees pour into Deshnoka, transforming the sleepy town into a living myth. And the Kaaba? They're fed more lavishly than royalty, milk laced with saffron, rice soaked in sugar syrup, and trays of temple-made sweets hand-delivered like gourmet room service. A fringe of the celebration features something especially delightful: the mouse parade. Children don homemade Kaaba ears, painted tails trailing behind them, and march through the streets in a procession led by drummers and priests. It's half ritual, half carnival, and entirely endearing. One popular act? The Ladu balancing game. Contestants attempt to carry as many round sweets as possible across a wobbly platform while dressed as mice. Winners are said to earn the gods' favor, or at least a year's supply of jaggery. Historians still argue whether these traditions arose from classical Hindu worship or developed more organically from local folk tales. But one thing's clear: this is religion with a grin. Devotion doesn't have to be austere. Sometimes it's playful, a celebration of joy in motion. As you wander through the crowds, the smell of roasted peanuts and marigold garlands fills the air. A Kaaba scampers past a food cart and pauses to sniff the air. The vendor tosses it a tiny crumb with a smile. "He's early for the feast," she says. "Or maybe he's a VIP." This easy coexistence between ritual and rodent feels almost dreamlike. You pass a booth where children are painting clay mice, some blue, some gold, some with glittering bindis on their foreheads. "That one's my grandpa," a little boy declares proudly, pointing at a lopsided mouse with a crooked grin. Another child recites a festival poem. Little whiskers, tiny feet, dance upon the temple street. Carney's children, soft and small, guard our dreams and hear our call. You pause, taking it in. These aren't just sweet distractions. These activities shape identity, embedding belief in paint, laughter, and rhythm. The Kaaba aren't feared or fought. They're cherished as symbols, as souls, and, for one day each year, as celebrities. In some villages, there's even a tradition where brides-to-be feed Kaaba as part of their wedding rites, offering sweets and whispering prayers for fertility, peace, and a long line of reincarnations. One tale speaks of a bride who forgot to offer food and spent her honeymoon being followed by a particularly cranky mouse. She returned to the temple, made amends with ladus, and her troubles mysteriously vanished. And here's your quirky tidbit. Some local musicians compose entire bhajans, devotional songs, just for the Kaaba. Lyrics like, "O tiny whiskered guardian, run to the gods with my love," have been recorded in temple archives. Picture that playing on loop while mice munch respectfully in the background. You find a shaded bench at the edge of the square, watching the festivities continue. There's no barrier between the sacred and the silly here. Everything flows together, chanting and candy, incense and improvisation. And in the middle of it all, Kaaba. Tiny, twitching vessels of faith, chaos, and, somehow, calm. It's oddly moving. You think back to the early tales. The legends of Mushika. The whispers about ancestors. And now here's this festival, like a live-action bedtime story with snacks and song. So you sit, and you smile, and you watch a child place a crown made of rose petals on a Kaaba's head, and no one stops her. Because here, even mice wear halos. Evening approaches now, slipping through the arches of the temple like ink in water. The sunlight turns bronze, the shadows longer, and the Kaaba grow bolder, emerging in elegant silence to resume their evening wanderings. You find yourself drawn toward a quieter chamber of the temple, where old texts rest on carved wooden shelves, protected behind latticed glass. It's here that the mood shifts, less festive, more contemplative. Time to go deeper. Because buried in these ancient scriptures, wrapped in metaphor and mystery, are references to mice that most people miss. They're not always called Kaaba. Sometimes they're referred to by Sanskrit names, Aku, Mushika, or even Ksitrapashu, and almost always, they symbolize something more than just small rodents. Let's open one of those scrolls together. Carefully. Pretend you're in the dim glow of a clay lamp, the air thick with the scent of sandalwood and old paper. You unroll the script and read a verse from the Rigveda, one of India's oldest sacred texts. It mentions the swift, darting one who burrows beneath the earth, who sees in the dark, and steals only what the gods permit. It never says, "mouse," directly, but come on. We know who that is. Sanskrit, as you may know, loves metaphor. A mouse isn't just a mouse. It's desire, restlessness, cunning, curiosity. And in many texts, the mouse becomes a stand-in for the manas, or the mind. Always busy, always searching, always gnawing at something unseen. In the later Puranas, the image of Ganesha riding Mushika becomes more than art. It becomes instruction. Ride your distractions, don't be ridden by them. Tame your wild thoughts. Steer your inner chaos. And do it gently, without violence. After all, even Mushika wasn't destroyed, he was elevated. Historians still argue whether these layers of symbolism were intended from the beginning or were retrofitted over centuries of storytelling. But the beauty of Hindu cosmology is that truth doesn't have to be singular. A thing can be many things at once: beast, symbol, ancestor, god. You flip another page in your imaginary scroll and land on a passage from the Garuda Purana, where mice are described as whisperers of karma, not loud, not obvious, but always present, nudging fate, carrying messages. Remember that idea, because it's one of the most quietly profound roles mice play in Indian thought. They're not warriors or kings. They're couriers, and that makes them sacred. This idea echoes in folk customs too. In some parts of Tamil Nadu, people leave bits of their children's first hair clippings outside the home for the mice to take away. It's symbolic, a ritual to pass on early karma, so the child can grow unburdened. In other regions, tiny mouse-shaped charms are worn during exams or court trials, small invocations for clarity and quick thinking. You step now into a side chapel of the temple where murals depict the great churning of the ocean, Samudra Manthan, and tucked into a corner is a mouse, watching the gods spin the world. He's not part of the action. He's not the hero. But he's there, observing, remembering. And in another mural, Ganesha's mouse is curled around a glowing script, as if guarding knowledge itself. Some say this points to the idea that wisdom often comes in quiet, overlooked forms, not as thunder, but as a whisper from a shadow. Your quirky fact tonight? Some yogic traditions believe the breath of a mouse, quick, soft, barely audible, is the ideal pattern for deep meditation. Not the roaring breath of lions, but the almost invisible inhale of a creature that lives close to the earth, aware of every shift. As you walk slowly back into the main temple hall, the symbolic weight of these creatures grows heavier, not in a burdensome way, but in that gentle gravity of realization. You're not just looking at mice. You're looking at memory, mind, metaphor. They skitter between lines of scripture. They guard the edges of dreams. They show up in the cracks, and then they disappear, leaving just enough of a trail to make you wonder. And maybe that's what the old poets meant when they said, "The gods move in silence, and sometimes they squeak." Night has folded itself neatly over the temple like a cotton shawl. The last rays of sun are gone, replaced by oil lamps flickering in alcoves, their light catching on gold leaf and mouse-sized shadows. The temple is quieter now, not silent, but softer, as if the Kaaba themselves know it's time for reflection. And there's no better time to consider the strange duality of the mouse's place in ancient Indian life, especially in the fields. Because while the temple Kaaba are worshipped and fed ladus, their country cousins, the mice in the granaries, in the wheat stacks, in the rice paddies, were a very different story. You crouch beside an open-air granary now, a small structure with woven reed walls and a thatched roof, lifted on stone stilts to keep pests out. A Kaaba darts across the dusty floor, and in this setting, you could almost feel the tension that ancient farmers must have carried. Reverence, yes, but also frustration. In early agrarian societies, especially in the Gangetic Plains and Deccan Plateau, mice were both a sign of abundance and a threat to it. If you had enough grain to attract rodents, you were lucky. But too many mice? And suddenly your harvest vanished one chew at a time. Ancient texts offer a glimpse into this dilemma. The Arthashastra, a foundational economic and political manual written over 2,000 years ago, lists grain protection as a key responsibility of village officials. And buried in its dusty instructions are mouse-related rules. Trap them humanely when possible, but never inside a place of worship. Why? Because even outside the temple, some mice were still seen as messengers of fate. This cultural tug-of-war gave rise to some curious practices. In parts of Madhya Pradesh, farmers built mouse shrines beside their fields, tiny platforms with rice offerings, placed there not out of affection, but as a plea, eat this and leave the rest alone. Historians still argue whether this was a spiritual practice or just an early form of pest management dressed up in prayer. Either way, it reveals a deeper truth. Humans have always tried to negotiate with nature, even if nature has whiskers and tiny pink paws. A folk song from rural Bengal sings of Turkey the Clever, a mouse who took only from the overfull bins and always left the seed grain untouched. He was praised like a deity, a protector of balance. In times of famine, some villagers even performed small rituals asking Turkey to return. And here's your quirky bit. In some parts of Gujarat, families would leave a spoonful of cooked rice on the floor each night, not as food waste, but as a grain tax for the rodent spirits. Forgetting to do it was said to bring minor chaos. A cracked cup, a missing key, or an unusually stubborn goat. You rest now under a canopy of stars, seated near a small shrine where a single Kaaba sits grooming itself beside a clay mouse statue. You think about the farmers, those who begged the mice to go, and those who begged them to stay. About how something so small could hold both threat and blessing in the same twitching body. And maybe that's the point. The mouse in Indian folklore isn't just a creature. It's a crossroads. Between reverence and irritation. Between divine messenger and common thief. Between ancestor and agricultural menace. But even in the face of grain loss, people found ways to show respect. No poison. No traps in temples. A shared existence negotiated day by day, ritual by ritual, squeak by squeak. So here, in the quiet dark, you begin to see the mouse not as a contradiction, but as a bridge. Between sacred and mundane. Between grain and God. Between the mythic and the everyday. And that's a lot of work for a little rodent. The temple has truly settled now. Even the Kaaba are moving slower, their once scurrying feet now soft and deliberate. You stretch out beside a carved column and let your gaze wander across the flickering patterns of lamp shadows on stone. You're not alone. A few rats lounge nearby, nestled together like furry punctuation marks. You don't flinch. Not anymore. By now, they feel like old friends. And friends, as it turns out, are what many villagers believe these little creatures to be. But only if you caught them at the right moment. Because when it comes to omens, few animals in Indian folklore match the predictive powers of mice. A Kaaba crossing your path might mean a change in fortune, or a ruined day, depending on direction, time, and context. It's said that if a mouse runs across your left foot first thing in the morning, you should cancel your journey. Bad luck is sniffing at your heels. But if it's the right foot, congratulations. You're destined for success. Though possibly in very unexpected ways. One village elder in Orissa swears he only proposes business deals after checking which direction the temple Kaaba are moving. North, Bye. South? Stay home. He's apparently built a small fortune that way, and never once blamed the mice for a bad quarter. These beliefs aren't just quaint, they're deeply embedded in the daily rituals of many rural communities. In Gujarat, a Kaaba seen entering the kitchen at dawn is considered a sign that guests will arrive that day. A Kaaba nibbling a sari edge before a wedding? Fortunate. Chewing the guest list? Deeply ominous. Historians still argue whether these beliefs stem from early animistic traditions or if they were grafted onto Hindu practice later. But what's certain is their endurance. Superstitions, after all, are just cultural shorthand for hope and worry wrapped in story. You wander now into a small annex behind the main sanctum, a room with cracked walls and bundles of dried flowers. It smells like turmeric and old incense. A Kaaba darts across the threshold, pauses, then reverses direction. A passing priest nods. "That means we'll be short on milk tonight," he says, completely serious. These omens aren't just rural eccentricities. Even in larger cities, temple caretakers have been known to read mouse behavior like scripture. One story from Varanasi tells of a mouse who nested in a sacred drum for 6 days straight. On the 7th, a long drought broke. Coincidence? Maybe, but no one dared move him while he stayed. Then there's the story of the Kaaba who climbed onto a bride's shoulder during her wedding procession, causing widespread panic. The astrologer was called in. After much debate, he declared it a sign of unexpected harmony. The couple went on to have 8 children and 2 dairy shops. Your quirky tidbit for this chapter? There's a temple in Maharashtra where priests keep a logbook of mouse omens. Daily entries describe their direction, behavior, and mood, complete with sketches. It's half zoology, half prophecy, and utterly captivating. You pause now beside a shallow brass dish filled with rice and turmeric. A Kaaba climbs in, turns a slow circle, then curls up and sleeps. The dish was placed there intentionally, by a family hoping for news about a lost relative. If the Kaaba stays the night, they believe peace will come. If it leaves before midnight, more searching is needed. And in this gentle, candlelit stillness, you realize that the mouse isn't just a bearer of signs, it is the sign. Small, silent, and full of mystery. A message in fur, a whisper at your feet. So as you lie back, lulled by the occasional squeak and the ever-soft scrape of paws, you begin to see omens not as warnings, but as invitations. To notice. To believe. To play a little game with the universe, one twitching tail at a time. It's deep into the night now, and the temple breathes in its own slow rhythm. Somewhere in the dark, a bell chimes gently every few minutes, more of a heartbeat than a signal. Most of the pilgrims have gone quiet, curled into corners or nestled near walls in loose cotton blankets. You remain, still and warm, watching a group of Kaaba shuffle around a bundle of flower petals like a fuzzy parliament. And that's a perfect transition into tonight's next tale: royalty, regalia, and mice that wear metaphorical crowns. Because in the far corners of India's folk imagination, not all mice are humble scurriers. Some wear the mantle of rulers. Regal mice. Mouse kings. Even whole courts of whiskered nobles who, according to legend, once changed the course of very human events. Let's start with one of the juiciest stories. The Rat King of Marvar. Set sometime in the 17th century, This regional legend tells of a Rajasthani prince plagued by indecision and doubt. Every night, he'd pace the palace gardens, whispering his worries into the air. One evening, a Kaaba appeared, perched atop a marble step, and listened. The next morning, the prince found a single grain of rice balanced on his windowsill. The day after that, a rose petal. Then, a sliver of sandalwood. Taking this as a sign, he began consulting the Kaaba nightly, and his fortune soared. The prince called him Maharaj Kaaba, Mouse King, and instructed his ministers to leave offerings of jaggery at the garden wall. Historians still argue whether this tale is political allegory or devotional fantasy. But in temple art across Marvar, you can find small murals of a mouse seated on a lotus, wearing a tiny crown. Some even depict the mouse whispering into a king's ear. The tale has modern echoes too. A Deshnokep priest swears that a certain Kaaba always arrives during political elections, pausing near the temple's central bell. He jokes, "When Kaaba King rings the bell, someone's about to lose their seat." Another story, lesser known but even more theatrical, involves a royal palace overrun by mice in medieval Madhya Pradesh. The Maharaja, in a panic, ordered traps and cats. But his queen had other ideas. She declared the mice sacred, invited temple priests to bless them, and claimed their sudden appearance was a sign of divine protection. That very year, the kingdom survived a devastating drought that wrecked neighboring lands. Coincidence? Possibly. But after that, every royal feast began with a grain offering to Her Majesty's Little Watchers. You lean now against a low pillar, its base carved with images of Ganesha, one hand raised in blessing, the other resting on his loyal Mushika. But here's what you notice. Mushika looks different. Bigger. Prouder. There's a gleam in his eye and a crown on his head. In many regional temples, Mushika isn't portrayed as a servant, but as a companion, equal in stature and spirit. His size varies by shrine. In some, he's smaller than a loaf of bread. In others, he's large enough to carry a child. In a few rare statues, he's carved with a throne of his own, just off to Ganesha's side. This reflects an old idea, that loyalty and wisdom can earn even the humblest being a seat near divinity. Mushika is no mere mount. He's a monarch in miniature. And perhaps, in some metaphysical plane, he rules over the spiritual realm of mice, guiding the reborn souls of Karni Mata's followers with steady paws. Your quirky tidbit tonight? In certain processions during Ganesh festivals, devotees dress one child as Ganesha and another as Mushika, complete with painted whiskers and a golden paper crown. They walk together through town, hand in paw, symbolizing balance, divine will and grounded service. You close your eyes briefly, imagining the coronation of a mouse, the flower garlands, the hushed prayers, the ceremonial grain offering, a throne made of sandalwood, and incense trailing into the stars. And maybe, just maybe, somewhere beyond the veil of what we know, there really is a mouse kingdom. A hidden court of wise old Kaaba, tales coiled like scrolls, holding council under moonlight, whispering secrets to gods, guarding the line between reverence and mischief, royal, rodent, and deeply, deeply sacred. The temple has entered its deepest silence. Only the occasional clink of a brass bowl or the shuffle of cloth disturbs the night. You stretch, letting the quiet soak in, and your eyes drift toward a mural near the eastern arch. It's cracked and faded, but you can still make out the outlines, curving tails, soft paws, and delicate brushwork that captures something more than just animal shapes. It's art. And art, of course, remembers what words sometimes forget. Because mice haven't only been revered in rituals or whispered about in stories. They've also been etched, carved, painted, and worn. Let's begin with something small: amulets. Across much of northern and western India, mouse-shaped pendants are worn not just by devotees of Ganesha, but by farmers, merchants, and even children. Cast in brass or silver, often no bigger than your thumbnail, these charms serve different purposes: warding off misfortune, inviting cleverness, or simply paying homage to Mushika. Some are designed with little compartments inside to carry grains of rice, turmeric, or sandalwood ash, tiny portable prayers. You pass by a temple stall where dozens of these trinkets hang like wind chimes. One features a mouse curled around a miniature scroll. Another holds a sweet in its paws. Each one slightly different, like memories molded in metal. You wander next into the archival wing, an airier space where temple custodians preserve old scrolls, sculpture fragments, and relics too fragile for daily handling. Here, you find pottery shards from the 11th century, their edges worn, but their design still visible. On one, a row of marching mice, tails interlocked. A ritual procession, perhaps, or maybe just an artist's fancy. Historians still argue whether these motifs were strictly religious or if they crept into secular life. What's known is that mice appear often, sometimes realistically, other times stylized, abstracted into spirals, or woven into mandala patterns. Then there's the temple architecture itself. At Karni Mata, if you look closely near the base of columns or around the doorframes, you'll find carvings of Kaaba nestled into floral borders. Not as invaders or pests, but as part of the temple's visual language. They're guardians, symbols of continuity. In some carvings, they're shown feasting. In others, they're sleeping beside saints. And here's your quirky bit for the night. In the Palace of Jodhpur, a rare textile from the 1800s is preserved under glass. It's a wedding sari embroidered not with flowers or peacocks, but with a repeating pattern of tiny silver mice chasing golden ladus. The story goes that the bride came from a Karni Mata devotee family and wanted to honor her ancestors, all the way down to the hem. You lean now against a low pillar, its base carved with images of Ganesha, one hand raised in blessing, the other resting on his loyal Mushika. But here's what you notice. Mushika looks different. Bigger. Prouder. There's a gleam in his eye and a crown on his head. In many regional temples, Mushika isn't portrayed as a servant, but as a companion, equal in stature and spirit. His size varies by shrine. In some, he's smaller than a loaf of bread. In others, he's large enough to carry a child. In a few rare statues, he's carved with a throne of his own, just off to Ganesha's side. This reflects an old idea, that loyalty and wisdom can earn even the humblest being a seat near divinity. Mushika is no mere mount. He's a monarch in miniature. And perhaps, in some metaphysical plane, he rules over the spiritual realm of mice, guiding the reborn souls of Karni Mata's followers with steady paws. Your quirky tidbit tonight? In certain processions during Ganesh festivals, devotees dress one child as Ganesha and another as Mushika, complete with painted whiskers and a golden paper crown. They walk together through town, hand in paw, symbolizing balance, divine will and grounded service. You close your eyes briefly, imagining the coronation of a mouse, the flower garlands, the hushed prayers, the ceremonial grain offering, a throne made of sandalwood, and incense trailing into the stars. And maybe, just maybe, somewhere beyond the veil of what we know, there really is a mouse kingdom. A hidden court of wise old Kaaba, tales coiled like scrolls, holding counsel under moonlight, whispering secrets to gods, guarding the line between reverence and mischief, royal, rodent, and deeply, deeply sacred. The moon has climbed high now, casting silvery light through the temple arches. It paints the marble floors in a glow so soft it seems otherworldly. You sit quietly, listening to the night deepen, when a soft voice beside you murmurs in English, tinged with colonial crispness. Unbelievable. Quite impossible to civilize the place with rats everywhere. You turn, but there's no one there. Only the memory of a time when reverence met ridicule, and the sacred Kaaba became a curious subject of imperial disbelief. Because once the British arrived in India, their steely-eyed rationalism collided hard with Indian mysticism. And nowhere was that more evident than at Karni Mata Temple. For British officials steeped in Enlightenment logic, the idea of people feeding, protecting, and even worshipping rats was baffling. Alarming, even. Reports from the 19th and early 20th centuries include a mix of wide-eyed curiosity and colonial disgust. One official from the Raj wrote that the temple was the most peculiar house of idolatry this side of Cairo, noting with visible discomfort that children and vermin cohabitate in prayer. Another, more sympathetic observer marveled at the calm demeanor of the rats. They sit upon the shoulders of devotees as if entitled. But it wasn't just words. The colonial government tried, more than once, to intervene. Health officers were dispatched. Sanitation reports were filed. There were even whispered plans to exterminate the Kaaba population. But each time, local resistance pushed back, fierce, organized, and deeply rooted in faith. One such incident is still told in Deshnoka with pride. A British officer, stationed nearby, ordered a health inspection of the temple in 1904. When he attempted to have a few rats removed for study, locals protested so loudly that he was forced to return them, under guard. The Kaaba were welcomed back with garlands and sweets. Historians still argue whether this event happened exactly as told or was shaped by local lore. But what's undeniable is the legacy of cultural clash. To the colonizers, rats were disease vectors. To the devotees, they were ancestors, carriers of prayers, and threads in the divine fabric. And the irony? While British scientists fretted over public health, locals pointed out that there had never been a major outbreak linked to the temple. Despite the sheer number of Kaaba, the site remained curiously clean in epidemiological terms. Perhaps the gods clean what the broom cannot, a priest once told a flustered inspector. In a particularly humorous exchange, one district commissioner suggested building a separate enclosure for the rats, like a zoo. The temple priests, reportedly, laughed for a solid minute before replying, "They're not animals. They're guests. You wouldn't cage your grandmother, would you?" Your quirky tidbit tonight? In 1927, a minor English newspaper ran a short piece titled "The Temple of Tales," describing Karni Mata in whimsical, semi-fictionalized terms. Though the tone was light, it captured something unexpected, a grudging respect for a culture that dared to find the sacred in what others feared. As you stroll now through the outer courtyard, you notice plaques added during the colonial era, grants, tax permissions, acknowledgments of land rights. Even as they ruled, the British couldn't completely untangle themselves from the Kaaba's hold on local hearts. This cultural tug-of-war echoes into the present. Modern science grapples with ancient faith. Cleanliness meets custom. But somehow, the Kaaba endure, tiny, unbothered, possibly reincarnated, definitely undefeated. And you? You sit once more beside a low wall, watching a Kaaba nibble delicately at a bit of ghee-soaked roti, utterly unaware that he was once the subject of imperial memos. Or maybe he does know. Maybe he remembers. Because here, in this temple where even conquest bent to devotion, the smallest beings taught the most powerful empires a lesson they never quite understood. Reverence can't be ruled. Especially not the squeaky kind. The night is at its stillest now. Even the lamps flicker less. The air is thick with the perfume of old incense, drying flowers, and a whisper of dust. You shift on the bench, your limbs pleasantly heavy, your mind floating somewhere between dream and memory. And that's the perfect state to examine something more current, more complex, the intersection where science, sainthood, and sanitation awkwardly bump shoulders. Because yes, in the 21st century, even Karni Mata's divine Kaaba are not above scrutiny. Public health officials still raise eyebrows. Scientists still take cautious samples. And documentaries still zoom in on furry feet with an undertone of nervous awe. On paper, Karni Mata Temple sounds like a health department's worst nightmare. 25,000 rats, many of them roaming freely, fed daily, and cuddled, sometimes literally, by visitors. Yet despite a few small incidents, no major disease outbreak has ever been traced to the temple. None. This baffling reality has prompted researchers to study the Kaaba. Some propose that the unique environment, outdoor airflow, high turmeric use, and communal food rituals creates an unlikely biological balance. Others say it's just luck. Temple priests, of course, have a simpler explanation: divine protection. Historians still argue whether the temple's sanitary success is a result of low rodent-to-human pathogen transfer, or if it stems from older, now lost hygiene customs that temple caretakers still follow without even realizing their scientific relevance. Either way, the Kaaba continue to thrive, and so do the pilgrims. But not all is harmonious. As the temple draws more tourists, some of whom arrive less for prayer and more for Instagram likes, tensions rise. Signs have been posted reminding visitors not to scream or run. They are not your pets. They are your predecessors. One sign reads, "Temple workers clean obsessively. Floors are washed daily, grains replaced twice. Leftover food is collected and composted, never thrown away. Gloves are worn while preparing offerings." And yes, there is a dedicated Kaaba caretaker, whose job involves gently relocating mice from risky spots, like electrical boxes, to safer havens. You wander now through a quieter gallery near the back, where marble tablets document recent temple restorations. Solar lighting has been added, drainage improved, all while keeping the sanctity of the Kaaba intact. One particularly telling moment: in 2012, a visiting health minister suggested installing steel wrap-proofing gates. The priests politely declined. Instead, they worked with local engineers to create rad highways, low, carved channels along the walls that allow Kaaba to move freely without darting across human feet. It's a compromise. Devotion meets design. Faith isn't being abandoned, it's being translated into something sustainable. Meanwhile, outside Dishnoka, animal rights debates simmer. Some activists question whether feeding the Kaaba to this degree is ethical. Are they truly free, or have they been turned into spiritual mascots? And yet, when asked, the temple's devotees simply shrug. "We don't own them," one says. "We serve them. There's a difference." There's a quirky twist here, too. Karni Mata Temple has become something of a study site for behavioral ecologists. Patterns of Kaaba movement are mapped. Social interactions observed. Researchers document nesting behaviors, hierarchy, and even communal sharing. Turns out, the temple is a real-time lab for rat sociology. And you, watching from your peaceful perch, can see it now. How one Kaaba pauses to let another pass. How two fight briefly over a morsel, then share it. How the smallest is ushered into the warmest part of the nest. It's society, just furrier. What modern science learns here, it seems, only confirms what devotees have long believed, that the Kaaba are not dirty, not savage, not lesser. They are souls waiting, learning, living quietly between layers of reality. So as streetlights flicker on in the distant desert beyond the temple walls, you reflect on this odd coexistence. How sanitation can serve sanctity. How science can respect spirit. And how, in this unlikely slice of the world, humanity has learned to love what it cannot control. You've returned to where you began, beside that wide marble archway, the scent of ghee still in the air, the soft scrape of paws a lullaby by now. A few Kaaba dart around you, one pausing to sniff your ankle with no fear, only curiosity. And that's fitting, because this last stretch of our journey is all about what they represent. Not just in myth, or art, or village tales, but in the quiet rhythm of belief itself. Because what, really, is the sacred mouse? 1,000 whiskered souls, they say, and not metaphorically. In Deshnoka and among Karni Mata's followers, each Kaaba isn't just a rat, it's someone, an ancestor, a soul between steps, a pause in the reincarnation cycle. And when you think about it like that, everything changes. That tiny one chewing a lotus petal near the altar? She might have once sung bhajans at this very temple. The plump Kaaba lounging in the offering bowl? Maybe a former farmer who once placed grains here for others. Even the mischievous one currently dragging a flower garland off a statue pedestal? Perhaps a devotee with a long history of dramatic exits. This belief reshapes death, makes it warmer, closer, more like waiting for your name to be called than fading into mystery. Families visit not just to worship, but to see their people, to feed them, to remember. Not with graves and solemn hymns, but with ladus and gentle jokes. There's a tenderness here, a humility, to see holiness in something so small, to accept that even a rat can hold divine potential, that maybe you're not above the Kaaba at all. Maybe you're right beside them, circling the same cosmic wheel. Historians still argue whether this belief emerged as a spiritual comfort during hard times, death softened by the idea of return, or whether it was always part of India's endless capacity for reinvention. But in the hush of this temple, it hardly matters. Belief doesn't wait for academic consensus. It lives in quiet offerings, in tiny footprints left in flour, in prayers whispered between whiskers. It's a compromise. Devotion meets design. Faith isn't being abandoned, it's being translated into something sustainable. Meanwhile, outside Dishnoka, animal rights debates simmer. Some activists question whether feeding the Kaaba to this degree is ethical. Are they truly free, or have they been turned into spiritual mascots? And yet, when asked, the temple's devotees simply shrug. "We don't own them," one says. "We serve them. There's a difference." There's a quirky twist here, too. Karni Mata Temple has become something of a study site for behavioral ecologists. Patterns of Kaaba movement are mapped. Social interactions observed. Researchers document nesting behaviors, hierarchy, and even communal sharing. Turns out, the temple is a real-time lab for rat sociology. And you, watching from your peaceful perch, can see it now. How one Kaaba pauses to let another pass. How two fight briefly over a morsel, then share it. How the smallest is ushered into the warmest part of the nest. It's society, just furrier. What modern science learns here, it seems, only confirms what devotees have long believed, that the Kaaba are not dirty, not savage, not lesser. They are souls waiting, learning, living quietly between layers of reality. So as streetlights flicker on in the distant desert beyond the temple walls, you reflect on this odd coexistence. How sanitation can serve sanctity. How science can respect spirit. And how, in this unlikely slice of the world, humanity has learned to love what it cannot control.